What up? Okay, welcome to episode 3 to the Performance Playbook. Today I have my one and only Greg Duncan. Greggy, just for the people that don't know you, give us a little intro of who you are and then we'll flow from there.
What's up, dog? How we doing?
Great, great.
Well, obviously, my name's Greg. I've been diving for 15 years. It feels like maybe it's a little bit less.
Mm.
I graduated from Purdue 2 years ago with a business degree and a minor in Spanish. As my side gig, I study the stock market and write in it. So that's diving plus stock market is my life. How about that?
And so for people that don't know, Greg has been my training partner, my big training partner. Jordan, don't get hurt by hearing that. Let's relax. But Greg's been my main training partner for the past couple years, and that kind of like flows within my first train of thought. But um, it's always better to have a training partner, to have someone push you, and then you can just build better. Let that be within business, let that be within sport. How have you been able to find that translation, even taking me out of the equation? Seeing training partners not only in the diving well, but within the business realm of the world for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, having a training partner in any aspect of your life, someone to push you, someone to keep you accountable, someone to just motivate you when you need it is everything, right? So, I mean, we've talked about obviously, a bunch of training things, how we can improve each other, but even us just talking about business, right? Like, we set goals, I set goals, you set goals, and they're different, but then we find commonalities and ways to say, oh, well, Brett, you could go a little bit harder, or is that the smartest thing to do? Or, so just having that ability to bounce ideas off of each other, off of whatever training partner you have. I mean, that's how you build long term for sure.
Yeah. I think it's pretty unique too to see what you've done, especially in the Twitter space. I feel like maybe this would be kind of beneficial for a lot of people to understand this aspect of what you've done, but you've not only grown your own following on Twitter, but you've found your own mentors. How's that been super beneficial, and how did you even kind of pull that off in the first place?
Yeah, so in 2020, I got really interested in the stock market. It crashed with COVID and all this extra stuff. And from that point on, I just started building a Twitter. So I started posting charts, I started posting my thoughts, I started interacting with, great traders, great investors, and tried to just get them to see my stuff. And, that I did it for 3 years before I really got any traction or whatever. And so I just posted every day. I was just consistent. It's the same thing in diving or in any sport or any walk of life where you want to be good, is you just have to be consistent when there aren't any real results. So yeah, I started building my Twitter. I got a job out of it. I talked to people who manage hundreds of millions of dollars and, based my plan for life kind of on the tracks of what those guys have done. And I mean, I've now created a newsletter. I've just done a whole bunch of stuff that I would have never thought was possible just by, being consistent in the niche that I liked.
Mm. Yeah, it kind of we talked about this a good amount, but we were we were actually talking to Jordan about this, but the whole aspect of playing. One big thing that I ran into once I was quote unquote done diving, when I thought I was done diving, was I got finished with my career and I was like, holy shit, like, whoa, where do I go? What do I do? And it stressed me out. And so what we were talking about is like playing, go play, go try all these different things. Did you end up doing that? So to speak, did you play around? Did you have a bunch of different thoughts, or did you kind of just like latch on to this investing because of X, Y, or Z, your dad or whoever got you into it? How did you play?
Yeah, well, I mean, the generic route for someone in finance is to go through whatever business school they have at college, get a finance degree, go into investment banking or private equity, whatever. And I didn't want to do that. So I kind of was like, okay, let me actually play, as you say, and just start throwing stuff on Twitter.
Mhm.
And there's different styles of investing and trading, and obviously you can play in that and figure out which one fits you best. But yeah, I mean, you just the whole point of finding what you want to do is by messing around. Like you're very rarely are you ever going to have like an immediate inclination of like, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, and it's never going to change. The path that I've gone down is changed like 5 times. I wanted to do like general business stuff with the Spanish idea. I don't use Spanish now other than just keep up with it. I now, instead of, wanting to become some crazy hedge fund manager, I write for hedge fund managers. Like it's so weird and so cool how, a certain idea may turn into 5 or 10 different things just by trying it out. And then you never know what opportunities will open up for you, once you've actually gone down those paths.
Yeah. How would you how would you suggest someone getting into playing around? Because I know it's like very broad. Well, what do you want to do and what are you looking for? But what would be like your main general tips into kind of like playing around, figuring out what you potentially might like to do?
Well, obviously, you'll have some sort of background in a topic, right? Like investing, for example, my dad always had on like CNBC or Fast Money or something when I got home from practice when I was a kid. And I didn't ever find any interest then, but then there was just like one thing, like the COVID crash, that sparked my interest. So there will always be areas in which you have a little bit more interest and, just travel down those paths, right? Like you have to feel out your curiosity and then you'll realize like, oh, is there a career path for me here? Is this just a hobby? Like for example, Spanish, I knew the only real career path was like some sort of translator, maybe for business, just that area. And it didn't really interest me in terms of like a professional path. But being able to talk with someone on the street in Spanish is super cool to me, right? So that curiosity didn't actually lead to anything. But yeah, I mean, to bring it back, my tips would just be, travel down the paths that you find interesting and see what comes about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting to be on the back end of that because it's almost hard. It's like, do you want to play and go try these other things while you're in school? Or you could even throw it out like, well, I'm trying to be a high performance athlete at the same time as a college student. I don't really have time to play, but it's not necessarily about the time that you have, but more so how do you utilize that time. And I feel like you would always do it very well to where, you would either like block out your time or you would just get almost obsessive with the thing that you might be into. And
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
important to
100%.
do that.
Yeah, and I've actually just thought about like 3 years ago when we both went down that whole like chess path. We got super into chess and I went crazy. I bought books and all this stuff. And I would allot like an hour and a half at the end of my nights to read a chess book. Like you're so right. Like if you, we all have 24 hours, right? But if you really are interested in something, like I'd much rather go down my interest than scroll on TikTok or scroll on Instagram. And that's not for everyone. But if that curiosity leads you down like a pretty aggressive studying path, like go for it. There's no reason not to. And that's how you build things while you're busy, right? Like we train 25 hours a week. Obviously, we both work to, supplement income as well. But then we're still skill building, right? Like we still find those periods of time to, improve or, just relax. It's just all time management, 100%.
Yeah. I actually think that's an interesting point too, especially when you bring up social media. And I feel like again, you're super good at this, but you have Twitter. That's it. Like the only thing that's on Greg's phone, social media wise, is Twitter, and it's because there's a deep purpose to it. And so, like when you're doing things, or even when you're kind of like dicking around, it's like there's almost a pushed or forced utility to it because that's you're always utilizing Twitter to build your brand or do these business stuff. So it's like it doesn't really take away when you look at other people's phones throw mine in there. I have Instagram, which is useful for me, and then I have YouTube, not as useful. And then, for you start to look at the majority of people, it's TikTok, Twitter, like you could just go down the line of all these different apps. And it is it's kind of fantastic when I look at your workflows. It's almost always playing into itself. It's always playing, like, no matter what you're doing, it's kind of aiding into it's forced veering you back into the right spot. And so maybe people can learn from that.
Yeah, I mean, go back 4 or 5 years, like I was on Instagram, I was on YouTube all the time, right? And then I just was like, dude, I hate looking at all this stuff that really has no impact on my life other than making me, envious or jealous of what someone else is posting. And I just hated that. One of the things that actually drove me to delete Instagram altogether was I saw a bunch of like diving videos from people that were my competitors, and I was like getting stressed in practice, like, oh, why don't I look like them? Why am I not doing what they're doing? And that stress, I was like, I stepped back and I was like, dude, I go on this app and I feel worse after I get off of it. Why would I ever have this on my phone? And so I just cut Instagram like that. And, I've downloaded it here and there just to keep up on messages from anyone, which again ends up being a waste of time. So yeah, the forced utility is a great point. Like I use Twitter for one select purpose. Obviously, I'm not 100% productive by any means. I could always be better. But yeah, and then I don't know, it just overall, like you have to ask yourself, after you get off these platforms, are you really using your time well? And do you feel better? There's the obviously opportunity cost of time, as you scroll. But if you're willing to be like, yeah, okay, I had fun on those 15 minutes I was on Twitter. Cool. Like, good for you. Be in a positive mindset afterwards. But yeah, if you're like super negative or you find yourself envious or jealous after hopping off any of these socials, it's not worth it. It will never be worth it.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, especially when you look at your phone or it like kind of gives you updates on, how much time you've been spending on certain apps, or like even I've tried to mitigate how much I'm on Instagram with like that 15-minute time interval. But like it's just so easy to just click the bottom, go, give me 15 more minutes, give me one
Give
more
me
minute.
15
Ah.
more.
And then you
Yep.
just like, just throw away the shovel and you're like, give me the whole day. Like we'll just
Yep.
restart tomorrow. I think it's kind of like a crazy, I think a big message that I've learned, and especially like watching you, is delete most of it, if not all of it, because again, it's people get inspired by, or at least I do, because I see most of it, but I get inspired by your workflow, and not just your workflow, but the consistency of your workflow. And so one phenomenal way, because that's probably the easiest way to start burning time in your day, is just to grab the phone. All right, well, this is only a 15-minute YouTube video to the next one that's, popped up, and then it's a never ending. It's the doom scrolling, which is the worst probably on TikTok and on Instagram, because they're so addicting. You're like, wow, it's kind of a good video. Let me just swipe to another one. So
Exactly.
you delete all of them. You say you just have Twitter on your phone. Is there anything else that you feel like was a big delete for you on your phone to just make sure you're like really honed in?
I mean, even if you don't delete all these apps, right? Like you can curate lists. Like on Twitter, for example, I can have my people I follow, and then I can create separate lists of people I don't even follow, right? So I have like an inspiration tab, a potential clients tab. Like, even if you don't end up deleting these social medias or whatever platforms you like, you can just curate your following. So,
Mhm.
like, if you find yourself consistently jealous or whatever by someone else's post, just unfollow them. I mean, you don't have to go super extreme. Even with, I actually still have YouTube on my phone, and recently I've been going down this like super massive Alex Hermosi rabbit hole. And so now all of my curated content is just his stuff, right? So at least I feel when I'm going on to get a mental break or whatever on YouTube, I'll at least still try to learn something out of it? So I would say, yeah, just curate your lists. If you're not going to completely remove it, curate your lists. Obviously, you could set that like 15-minute duration, but then you have to follow it. That's the hard part,
Yeah.
right? For me, I failed it too. So I was like, all right, screw it. I'm just gonna delete it, not even
Yeah.
give myself the opportunity. But yeah, I mean, there's this app called, I think it's called 1 Second, or I don't know, I'll look after. But every time you go on Twitter, you can set it up to whatever social you want. Every time you go on it, it'll just put a little bit of friction and it'll say like, "Do you want to open this?" And then you're like, "Oh shit, I don't know if I want to open this." And then throughout the day, it'll say like, "Hey, you've reached or you've tried to open Twitter 15 times in the past day.
Mm.
Why?" And then you're like, "Oh shit, I spent so much time on this app doing nothing." And that was another app where I was like, "Oh wow, this could actually be pretty useful."
Yeah, that's interesting too. That was going to be kind of like my follow-up question to that is there any apps or even websites that you can do the inverse with that almost force you or at least put you in a better direction to be more honed into what you're doing? So the one app, what'd you call it? The one app?
Yeah, it's called like one, I don't know, I'll look it up, but I think it's called like 1 Second or something.
1 second.
Um, yeah, and it'll like I said, it'll add friction to the process. And
Mm,
you'd be surprised that if you add or remove friction, how willing your body is to make changes. Like for example, I added this little straw to my drinking, and my water intake is probably like tripled because all I have to do is sit there and just drink it, right? There's no friction. But yeah, another like little productivity focus thing is this little timer, and
mm,
you set it for whatever duration you want. This one goes up to 90 minutes, and then you take everything else away. So if I have one task, I will say maybe it'll take me 60 minutes. I'll put this timer for 60, crank it, and then all my notifications, my phone, everything out of the room, or at least, silenced. And that again keeps me on task without getting distracted or whatever the case may be.
oh, that's interesting. So like almost having a physical timer instead of just putting a timer on your phone, like almost feels or just produces more productive time because you can't just click the timer on your phone and then just go on your phone. You take it
Exactly.
out and then put
Exactly.
something physical there.
Yeah,
That's
and then
good.
anytime I feel like I've gotten distracted, so I'll put it for 60. I don't know if you can see this very well,
Yep.
but I'll put it, and then if I do get distracted and I realize it, I'll just pause it. So then I can track, okay, well, if I started at 60 and now it's at 30, I've spent 30 minutes of like deep focused time. And okay, I could take my break, but I know I still have 30 minutes left on whatever task I was doing.
Mm.
Um, Another one that I actually just read the other day was called the kale phone versus the cocaine phone. And the kale phone is, imagine kale, right? Kale sucks for a lot of people. It's not great, but maybe it's good for you, debatably. Different topic. But the idea is on your kale phone, you remove all colors, all notifications,
Mm.
all whatever things that will keep you on it addictively. And that way, when you use your phone, it's like you just don't want to use it, right? So remove the colors, remove the notifications. I set mine up where I triple tap the home button or the lock button, and my phone will just go to black and white mode, and then all that other stuff happens. That's a good one too, just to be like, all right, screw this, I'm off my phone. I hate it. Like you'll realize when you're looking at it, like, wow, it looks so dull. I hate this, and then you just get off of it.
Yeah. So just based off of time working, you're utilizing a timer. Um, I've been recently reading The 4 Hour Work Week. I feel like we
Mm,
lightly talked about this, but what are your thoughts on, because I feel like you have people on both sides. We'll just do very to the point work for a minimal amount of time and don't it like it's the quantity over the quality. But sometimes you have the other side where it's like we'll do both because like how fast are you
yeah.
trying to build this life, and so you could do the 4 hour work week, but it might be holding you back. Where do you sit within that, and what sounds better to you?
Yeah, I mean, so just to connect it back to diving, right? Like when I was a kid or a club diver, my learning curve was I had so much to learn and so much to improve on. And at that point, the only thing you can really do to catch up is do more. I
Hmm.
mean, Kobe Bryant had this story that said when he got in the league, he realized like he was so far behind. So he started working out at like 5 a.m. That was his first workout. His next workout was at 10 a.m. And then by like 4 p.m., he had already done 3 or 4 workouts. And everyone else is probably at like one or two. And so he kept that consistency all the way, up until he finished his career. And he turned out to be one of the best players ever, right? Because he made up that, it's called ignorance debt, is what I'm learning it's called. But when you start something, you just have so much to learn, right? Like you're so ignorant to the actual ways of, doing the thing. And so diving, you have to do so much extra modeling. You have to do so much extra core. You have to stretch, right? Like there's so many things that you have to do. And volume at that point will negate the amount of talent someone else has. Now, once you've found, like for us, we can't practice 6 hours a day every single day or else we die, right?
Yeah.
Because we've already reached the level of proficiency where, more isn't better. It's actually just more targeted to the things that we know we're deficient in, but we know those deficiencies. We know what we have to change. So, long way of saying, at the start of anything, I would say volume is always better. You have to figure out what paths you need to go down to create those efficiencies. And then once you've found, a good level of proficiency, you can decide like, okay, where's my time best spent now? I don't have to focus so much on volume or quantity. I can focus on quality.
Mm. So what would your main thoughts be then on burnout? Like, is that because someone's just not passionate enough about what they're doing, or is there some strategic time that you can take off that actually plays into you, being more quality when you are doing that quantity?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how I feel about burnout. I haven't like fully determined my opinion on it because I feel like I've felt burnout before, whether it's diving at the end of the season. The only thing I can think about is taking a break. That's definitely valid for sure. But work wise, like, yeah, okay, if I sit in front of the computer for 8 hours a day, I know my brain by hour four is not going to be working, right? And so you just have to balance, like, okay, how bad do I need this thing? How bad do I want this thing? And then you just have to deal with the burnout to it. Like, for you, example, like you were in Germany, I'm sure you were burnt as crap by the end of the season, right? You went from August to August, but you had no choice. You had to get through it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the question you ask yourself, like, okay, yeah, I may not want to do this right now, but the work's got to get done. The meat's got to get done. I can't just not do it. So, in that sense, you have to push through it. But yeah, I would say to not burn out, I mean, you just have to make sure you're finding the times in which you can be balanced or which you can relax. And I would say not scrolling on your phone is a great way to reduce the amount of burnout because, you just get to have a break for your mind.
Yeah. That's kind of interesting too, is like you could almost produce the sensation of I have to. It's like the immigrant mentality. Like I think about like my grandfather. He came in, had nothing, and it became a necessity to at almost all times be grinding through and trying to get what you need to be, what needs to be get done is getting done. And I don't really have too much time for play. Play is when the thing that's done needs to be done, that's done. And so
Exactly, exactly.
yeah, if you could kind of produce that somehow in your mind, if you don't really have that necessity, because I mean, you have the two different. I feel like there's some gray area, but like you have the people that are coming up and kind of their family came from nothing, and so they have that drive of like, oh well, I can use this to my advantage. I don't want to be where my parents were. But you also have the people that were kind of middle class, like hey, like we're living pretty comfortably and we'll figure it out because I feel all right. But not everyone wants to be with that low drive that's been like kind of given to them.
Yeah.
Do you have any little pieces there? What would you do? What would you tell that person to give them more drive
Yeah,
and
I
like
mean, I
necessity?
would say exactly, like you have to determine how bad you want the thing.
Mm,
If you want to be super good at whatever sport you're doing, well, yeah, you got to push through when you're super sore, or you got to push through when you don't feel like doing it. There's no other option because people at the top, they're doing it, right? And actually, a good reframe I've just learned recently is asking yourself, like, create an avatar, right? So if I want to be an Olympian, I would ask myself, what would an Olympian do right now in this current situation? So anytime I feel like, oh, it sucks, I'm up at 6:30. Okay, what would an Olympian do? They'd get up, they get ready for practice, and they'd go. There's no questions asked, right? Or an Olympic champion, whatever you want to create that avatar to be. That's a good way to be like, oh, okay, I'll get out of my own way now. Like, I know what I want to be. I
Mm.
know what this person would do in this situation. So then, if I just want to be that person, I'll do the thing that that person does. And I think that would be one way for someone to at least push themselves a little further than where they, were originally.
Yeah. I think a piece that I've liked that we've both done, you've taken it to a completely different level, but for diving itself, I mean, most things, right, are about 100%. Like that's what we've learned. The deeper you get into diving, you're like, oh yeah, it's like 70-30, like 70% mental, 30% your body. And then the deeper you get into it, you're like, oh, 95-5. And then you get all the way deep, like you're like, you're drowning at that point. You're like, it's 100% mental because your body is your mind's guiding the body. And so if your mind's not there, the body's not really going to join. And so, with that in mind, it's like you and I got super into journaling for diving, and like we both at least saw the huge benefits that we can get. But the one thing that I saw with you is you went, well, this is super useful here. Let me just drag this over to work and utilize that because I've seen you just go nuts on so many different things. What if you're watching a YouTube video, you're taking notes because it's going to play into your work. How did you get into that, and why is that so useful? Because I feel like most people don't even think about that. Well, why would I journal for work? Like what?
Yeah, exactly. And again, the question always becomes like, what would this person do? And if
Mm.
I know if I want to be a billionaire one day, if you read any autobiography by anyone successful, they have some sort of note-taking system to internalize the content that they've consumed, right? Like most people will mindlessly watch a YouTube video, and it could be informational for sure, and then they'll never implement anything. They'll never actually learn from it and then change their behavior. And I found the best way to do that for myself, and even just going back to diving, right? Like, okay, if I made a correction on whatever dive and I had a specific thought, okay, let me write that thought down so that the next time I come in, I know that's the thought. Let me build on it. And it's the same idea for outside of diving, but just in business, right? Like, okay, I learned something. Let me write that thing down because it was obviously impactful in the moment, and then I'll revisit it, right? I'll just continually train my mind to see that same idea, behavior, whatever, and then I'll actually be able to internalize and apply it. And I think that's the difference between a lot of people who say they do great things and then the other people who do great things, right? It's always the action. Like you and I have the same goal. Like we have to, or you and someone else, you guys have the same goal, like be a great diver, right? The difference is you show up to practice every day, you get out of your comfort zone every day, and you make changes every day. Someone else won't, right? And that's the biggest thing that I've learned, at least in the business sense, is you just have to do it. You have to say what you want to do and then go execute. And that's again, same thing in diving. I mean, I want to be really good, so go be really good. It's
Yeah.
just that simple.
So it's like you're taking notes when it comes to maybe YouTube videos that make sense, even a Twitter post, I'm assuming that kind of sticks with you. And then while you're going through the act itself of investing, marketing, you name it, you're writing things that made sense, that worked, that didn't work. That's kind of usually the
Yeah,
flow for you.
yeah, 100%. So I actually just downloaded a PDF this morning, read it, whatever, it was super impactful. And then I wrote notes on the side of it. And then I have this other like it's called Drafts. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it's just a note-taking app. And I'll just write my thoughts in there, consolidate them at the end of the week, and then build out a plan for the next week to say, okay, this is what I've learned and this is what I want to implement, right? So I just want to put action to the learning. But yeah, with like a Twitter, thread or whatever that does really well from someone else, I'll bookmark it, copy it, go back and study the actual structure, and then I'll make my tweets more like that structure. And it's, you just repeat what other people have done successfully, copy it, iterate it based on how it fits into your life, and then go from there. But the key is, yeah, you have to spend time to see what you learned, write it down, and then implement.
Yeah. And so just even speaking on Twitter itself, I've watched you build over these past few years, and it's played into what you've been wanting to do for quite a bit, and now it's actually like providing, you know, quite a bit of benefit. What's the utility for most people or a majority of people to maybe attempt to either build their Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, you name it? Why would that be useful?
Yeah, so I mean, it just depends on what you want, but for the people who want time freedom, right? Like there's obviously financial freedom, there's time freedom, health freedom. If you want time freedom and you don't want to be working for someone else, you have to build a persona, a character online that people will cling to. You have to create. And so obviously with social media, we consume a ton, but maybe 1% actually create and put their voice out there to be heard. And you'd be surprised, like, we're all very individual. We all have different thoughts. We could read the same thing and have a thousand different ways to interpret it. Being able to share the different interpretations or the different thoughts is what will make you stand out. And that's what will help you build a following, right? Like, people who go viral on TikTok, I bet 100 other people could have done the same thing. The only difference is that person did it, right? And they stood out and other people like to follow. So, yeah, I would say the main benefits of building a personal brand or building a following on any of your socials is to gain, eventually monetize it, and then get paid to create. And that's, again, the difference between the consumer society we're in and then the creator society, which is probably 1 to 99, right?
Yeah. With that too, though, since you've been doing this for so long, a lot of people run into the same issue, myself included, was that insecurity, the weird, icky feeling of like, ugh, well, I'm posting, I'm giving my opinion. Do I even have the knowledge to do so? How do you break through that since you've done it so well and you've been consistently posting? Is it something that just fades away, or how do you break that?
Yeah, I mean, at the start of anything, you're going to feel like a fraud, right?
Yeah.
And anytime you share your opinion on something, you're never going to feel qualified enough, right? Like, but you have to determine what is that qualification? Who gives you that right to say, oh, I am or I'm not qualified, or what I said does or does not matter. At the end of the day, like, I don't want to live my life in the eyes of someone else, right? So, like, I want to build a LinkedIn following, but I know professionally, all the people that I grew up with, I'm friends with on LinkedIn. I'm never going to see him again, first of all. That's kind of the first step. Will I ever see this person again? If the answer is no, why do I care about their opinion? If I am going to see this person in the future, if that your relationship is valuable to me, then they should or would be very supportive of whatever you post, right? So anyone who is of value to you will always support you. And
Mm,
I think that reframe is like, yeah, okay, so then I should share what I'm thinking, right? Because I'll either learn that the person I was friends with isn't actually my friend or they're a real one. And that's,
mm.
how you get through those thoughts in your brain of like, I feel kind of weird posting this. Screw it. You just got to say screw it and send it. I mean, you learn quick, like, you get a lot more positive feedback than negative feedback by posting how you think, and you'll actually gain a pretty legit following from doing so.
Yeah, and I feel like speaking of Alex Hormozy, he has a lot of really good insight on stuff like that too. I remember like one of his big messages for one of his videos was like "and what?" or it's like "and,"
Yeah, exactly.
like it's
And what?
yeah, like you're gonna be dead, they're gonna be dead, and you know it's gonna be gone. Like no one's really gonna, even if you post a bad video, you might get shit on for a little bit, but like even if you do get shit on, like it's gonna end at some point. It's not gonna be that big of a deal. You're also one piece to think about maybe is you're not that important for someone to just like
Exactly.
sit on it for that long, like, oh, I hate this person because they posted their opinion of X, Y, or Z. It's just like not that deep.
Exactly. And actually, we talked about this the other day. But Betty White, for example, right? Like one of the most influential women of all time, lived to be just short of 100, whatever. She
Yeah.
died. The whole world freaked out for about a day. And then I bet this is, for anyone listening, the first time you've heard of Betty White since then, right? Like, so it just goes to show she was so influential. Everyone cared for like a day and then completely forgot about her because we all have our own shit to figure out,
Yep.
right? Again, to what you just said, we're not that important. We never will be that important, even if we're super influential. We're going to be forgot about, and we're only on this floating rock in space for so long. So why would I care about what Lindsay thinks of me or whatever, who cares? I'm gonna mess up, she's gonna mess up, he's gonna mess up, we're all gonna mess up and learn. It's cool.
Yeah, it's almost like figuring out that like everyone kind of sucks. And so,
Hmm.
post your opinion. The people that like it are gonna like it, and like you said, they're kind of like your core crew, and then the ones that don't, then they'll probably won't even listen to it anyways. And if they're smart enough, they'll probably just unfollow you, which just, hones in your group anyways. Because you're like the whole thing, which you could probably play into here is it's you don't need a million followers. You just need that pretty important 1,000 people, like the main 1,000 people to like really love your content that are willing. Oh yeah, like I'd be interested in paying 4.99 for this guy's thoughts every Tuesday and Saturday, whatever that is. Even though that's hard to build, and you've been
Yeah.
building on that. You might have what close to 25,000 followers now on Twitter, but like it's hard to get those like true 1,000 fans that are like, yo, Greg posted that. I'm on it. I'm liking every single one. I'm retweeting every single one. He has a newsletter. I'm there for it. Like, yeah, I'll pay however much. Like, how do you really play into those people? How do you build that 1,000?
Yeah, so I mean you just see what performs best, right? Like what gets the most engagement, what drives the most comments, what drives the most interaction between you and others. And then you just make more of that content, right? Like you don't need, if for example, like if I felt like I'm going to post a pretty, off the deep end tweet on the market, I'll post it and then I'll see if that actually gets good engagement because it's something different or whatever the case may be. And by curating your own voice and saying things that are on your mind, a lot of people will end up resonating with you. And I think that's the thing a lot of people don't understand or feel scared to do is like by being yourself and
Mm-hmm.
not, playing into someone else's idea of what you should be online, you actually can build a pretty legit following quickly because you're being yourself. You don't have to fake it, you don't have to do anything. So those relationships build. And then, yeah, to what you said, like I'd rather have 1,000 followers that will all buy something from me than a million that will never buy anything from me because they don't really care who I am, right? Like I want to build those relationships and you do that by being yourself as you would in person, right? Like anytime you build a long lasting relationship with someone, it's because you're both on the same page. Like, I know who you are, you know who I am, and that's why we're such good friends, And that's basically the online persona too.
Yeah, and it's almost like scary to be like 100% you too, because it's like
Yo, yeah.
you want that like neutrality of, well, like I'm not gonna make this person upset, or I might, make most people happy, but at some point it's like you're one just shying away from who you really are, which is kind of depressing that you have to like fake that. And it probably feels better long term to just be like, dude, this is who I am. I wear barefoot shoes and yeah, I slap in some toe spacers. What are you gonna do about it? Like, what are you gonna do? Run from me then?
Exactly. Exactly. And
Uh,
again, it goes back to the whole thing. Like, the second you post something being yourself, you'll realize, oh, are those actually my friends? Like, do they accept me for how I think, for what I want to do, for where I want to go? And if the answer is yes, then they're your real friends, right? And yeah, 100%. I wouldn't want to try to portray or fit into someone else's image because a lot of the people online, I'm sure everyone can attest to this, is like it seems perfect. Everyone's life seems perfect, whether it's on Instagram or TikTok. And like Alex Earl, for example, the super famous TikToker, Macy tells me, like, my girlfriend, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, Alex Earl is herself. Like she posts videos without makeup on. She does this with, so she's really interactive with her follow and she's real. And that's why, at least in Macy's opinion, she's blown up so quickly. And again, that idea is the same across every walk of life. Like it's way easier to be yourself and deal with that feedback of who you are than fitting into someone else's ideal and then, never being happy or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And that it's funny too, because that fits into like so many different themes of life too. Like even if let's say you're looking for a romantic partner, it's like, yeah, you can try to be neutral and connect with a million people, but like they're all gonna be shallow and they'll never stick. Or it's like one might stick and then they find out like, oh shit, this guy's kind of weird. And he does wear toe spacers. Or you can just figure out that, I wear toe spacers right off the bat. And you're like, okay, well, this is it. This is what I have to deal with. It's
Exactly.
probably going to get more extreme because he's a weirdo. But like, play into it. Just lean into your weirdness, and then people will like that. With that TikTok girl, it's like she probably just leaned into who she was, and then boom, it's like the people that like it like it.
Exactly. And you resonate quickly with a message when you realize it's authentic. I
Yeah.
think that's the key, right? We're, as humans, very good at recognizing authenticity.
Mm.
And, if you are who you say you are, it'll usually be good for you long
Yeah.
term, for sure.
So if you're building your audience like you have, um, what are your main tips? What would be now that you've gotten so far and you're still trying to build as much as you can? What's worked for you?
Consistency over everything, for sure. And at the start, volume. I think those two things, volume and consistency, when you start anything, kind of what we spoke about earlier,
Yeah.
will drive a ton of success.
Mm.
And that's in any, whether you're trying to build a business, whether you're trying to build a following, whether you're trying to become a better athlete, whatever, be consistent, do the things that you say you're going to do, and then do them a lot. I think those would be the three main messages to anyone starting anything that at least I've learned. And even, I look back over the past year, 2 years, my priorities have changed, whatever. I could have been more consistent, but at least the smallest amount of consistency will beat 95% of people. And I think that's what we've learned through sport too. It's just we are super consistent with the way we train, the way we eat, the way we sleep, all of that. And it pays dividends come June, July, August. So yeah, I would say be consistent, put in a lot of work early and do it. Actually do it.
Yeah, because that makes sense to me, and I like that thought. You could almost add the bonus of what we've already talked about, but it's like analyze what you do. Analyze it.
Yep.
Write a journal. What posts worked? What posts didn't work? Or again, go back to sport then if people want to connect that way. It's like you can go through all of these practices and you can still learn, but just imagine if you had every practice analyzed after. And so you weren't just moving through the motion, but you were learning from each movement, even if it was a horrible practice. Who's to say that a horrible practice, quote unquote, is a bad practice? Maybe you learn the most from that situation. So I'm assuming the same goes for you when it comes to a post. If it's just dead silent, well, you can probably analyze that and grow off that. Is that something that you've kind of run into?
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. I post things still now where I'm like, oh, damn, that flopped, right? Like, okay, cool. I tested an idea, it flopped. I know I'll never do it again,
Hmm.
or I'll see why, right? And Mr. Beast, I'm sure everyone knows who he is, but I just watched a video yesterday, and he was like, post 100 things, try to get 1% better each time. So fix one thing in the previous content, video, whatever you just posted, and after you do 100, you look back and you say, oh shit, I've gotten a lot better at this thing. And I don't think people do that. They may do the thing, but like you said, if you're not analyzing what you did well and what you did poorly, you'll never actually end up growing, right? Like you'll never change the behavior. And then at that point, you're just stagnant, right? You won't see anything improvement wise. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that I've liked based off of watching you and your journey, and it's kind of similar to me. I've kind of eventually searched for this, but your connection with people on Twitter and how you've kind of built out this, like I'm assuming you've haven't met most of them in person, but to actually utilize it, it's one thing to follow someone, cool, like that's quote unquote a connection, but I'm talking about reaching out to them, talking to them, kind of eating on the knowledge that they have that they're willing to, give to you. How do you kind of walk into a relationship like that? Because I feel like for most people that's pretty intimidating to message someone to potentially get rejected. What's your method there, your mindset?
Yeah, I mean, when I was first building my account, I was scared. I was definitely scared to reach out to the bigger names in the space, and I still am for some of the bigger guys and gals. But the idea is, I want to provide value by being who I am. It goes back to that same message. So if this is ever going to turn out to be some long-winded relationship between the person that I idolize and myself, well, then I'll probably have to be myself and then provide value. Like they're busy, I'm busy. They're not just going to respond to some DM, hey, like your stuff, cool. Like, okay, positive, but be your personalize the message. Say, hey, like I really enjoyed XYZ. Have a question. And that would actually help them be like, oh, well, maybe I have a hole in my content here. I can fix this gap, right? And then you start to be like, okay, cool, we can build a relationship because I've taken a lot from you. Like if you're my idol or mentor, you've taught me a lot. Now, how can I make this relationship mutual? And I think that's one way to go about at least reaching out to the people you idolize. Just take a step, try to be valuable. Try to put your imprint on the conversation, on the topic, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I feel like we were actually just discussing this recently, especially with Danny Miranda, is not taking anything to heart. So if someone doesn't respond, they might be actually busy, or they just might
Yeah,
not. They might not notice you yet, and so you do have to give that time. And he's such a good example because again, he's a fairly smaller creator, and he worked his way up to getting Gary V, Alex, you name it, these big names. But he probably did a lot of outreaches that didn't necessarily work, and you could either take the two paths of I can either be really mad and hate this person because they didn't respond to me, or it's like, hey, maybe give this time and I can keep building myself and cultivating who I am to where, hey, they do see me and then they do recognize me. Do you ever feel like you walk into that?
yeah. I mean, so I'm I kind of spoke about this earlier, but now I'm starting to write for big content creators in the trading space. So I'm writing their education for them, and I have to reach out via Twitter DM. I mean, that's the only real contact I have. And I've sent, I don't know, 35, 40 DMs, and I've gotten responses on 10, right? And I've gotten two clients. Again, that idea of like, okay, I'm not going to get responded to. There's just going to be a subset of people that will, one, never respond to me, or if they do, it's just not right now. But it's really easy to get discouraged and say, oh, I suck, whatever. But again, like you said, people are so busy. And I've followed up with so many people that are like, hey, bro, like, love this idea. Sorry, didn't see it. Was super busy. Like, let's look into it. And that, again, that positive feedback, like, oh, you're right. I just wasn't their priority. But we all have different things to focus on in life. So understanding, like, it's not a personal attack. You're going to fail. You're not going to get responded to. It's okay. Same thing in diving. Like, I could miss 9 dives straight at practice, but that's what practice is for. Like, I'm trying to make a change. I'm trying to get better. And then eventually, once that one hits, it's like, oh shit, it just clicked.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like you're really putting yourself out there, which is a scary thing. So maybe it's a piece of it is more so just the insecurity because you could walk up to someone in real life and put yourself out there, but like you almost get instant feedback, which is better. Boom, negative. Hey, no, I'm good. I don't want to talk to you. And so it's just like it's almost worse that okay, I send out or like you'll send out this cold DM and then there might just be
Crickets.
silence. And it's like
Crickets.
for some people and maybe for most, that's kind of worse. You're like, damn, dude, like there's the piece of well, when are they gonna reach out? Did they see it? Which then kind of like, well, it's kind of stings a little bit because they saw it and they're like, no, you know?
No, yeah,
And so it's
exactly.
like you almost have to play with the expectation of, hey, keep your expectation low. They will most likely say nothing, but like that's okay. And maybe it's like you said, it's you just need more repetitions. I need to do this more frequently to kind of get used to rejection. And I'm assuming just within your space, like you've had to learn through that failure and rejection, just like diving. You're like, well, I reached out to this person, it didn't work. Maybe I need to reach out differently. Is that something kind of again it's playing into how can you intentionally learn from every step that you take? It's just like
Yeah,
you know lower the expectation and then try a lot. Does that kind of
exactly.
seem fair to you? Does that sound right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, of course. I mean, I think if you're successful in anything in life, if you look back and you're like, oh, well, it actually took me a lot of failure to get to where I am, then you can actually gauge your expectations for anything new you do. You just realize, like, okay, there's going to be a massive learning curve. And whether it's people actually responding to me, or my messaging sucks, or my offer sucks, or whatever the case may be, as long as I iterate, you know, I can get bogged down in the short term. But if I know long term this is the right direction, then there's no real reason to say, oh, well, I really suck at this. I'm super down. Like, yeah, there's just going to be a subset of failures. There always will be. And it's the same in trading. Like, no one makes, or no one has a trade, every single trade make them money. It's just impossible. So that's one thing in trading that's taught me, like, even the best traders are right 3 out of 10 times, 4 out of 10 times. If you look at baseball, the best hitters average like point 0.3, point 0.4. So they're hitting 4 out of 10, right? And they're making hundreds of millions. Like they're the best in the business. So again, just realize like you don't have to be perfect to be really good. And I think that's applicable to everything we talk about.
Yeah.
Business, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of fun to see all those connections, like especially within sport too. Like just this whole conversation, I feel like we could have just interchanged diving with your investing or diving with your business that you're building. Like and maybe that's something that a parent could even lean into if they're kind of leaning towards, well, like I don't know if I want to put my kids into athletics or this or that. It's like, well, I mean, like there is a lot of connection. Like the amount of things that you can learn about yourself, it's not necessarily about being fit. It's about training the mind, right? Like what can you actually learn from this? What would be like your big piece? What is like the biggest takeaway you feel like you got from diving, especially now that you're on such a high performing level? What's that big piece that maybe you never really noticed until now?
Yeah, exactly what you said. Sport is so much more than just being a good athlete. Like I've learned so much about discipline, about consistency, about not getting too high, not getting too low. Those are all things that becoming an athlete teaches you and becoming high performing teaches you. So that when you transfer those skills into something else you do in life, it's like there's way less of a learning curve. You just know what to expect. And I think that's why a lot of successful people were in some form or another athletes in a different walk of life. It just makes sense. Like the second diving is so mentally challenging, athletics is so mentally challenging that the second you take a step out of your arena and you realize, like in business, for example, it's way less mental. It's more just about doing. Like, and I know how to do, right? Because that's what I learned in sport. Yeah, okay. Now it's a game of playing long term, of being like, okay, I'll show up every day. 99% of people won't show up every day, and I'll win. It's that simple. And there's way less thinking that goes into those other walks of life. And I think that's the main takeaway I've had for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually, so I just recently went to an orchestra and I was kind of playing that in my mind. I'm watching the whole orchestra was built around this one violinist. And it was incredible to see the skill, the passion. He's memorizing like 3, 4 songs that are like 15 minutes each, just going ham, just plucking away. It sounds incredible. And then you kind of look at that and you're like, that within itself is the sport. Like that trade diving for his music passion. It's like the best of the best are doing the same things. Like the amount of effort and work that you put towards it is incredible. Like you can feel the passion, and like you kind of see the same thing within football, tennis, you name it, diving. Like you can see the passion, like the amount of work that person put in. And yeah, there's always going to be those few people that are just like unbelievably gifted and do, some, but that's not the majority of the highest performers. And maybe I think that's one thing I would always get upset with listening to some people. And maybe that's just like a self-protective mindset of like, oh, well, they were born with it. And you're like, were they? Because we all kind of started at the same spot. Not like some people are physically in a better spot. Some people are just mentally smarter. But the majority of us are are not great when you start. I mean, it's like my whole journey with rock climbing. Horrible, horrible. But it's like in due time with the reps, the learning, it's like you get there. And so I just love that. And after the orchestra, I watched the movie that I showed you, which is Whiplash, about
Mhm.
the drummer. And it all plays into that circle, that never ending circle. It's like you're not working hard enough. And that's why you're not that good. Work harder. And that's that whole push. I mean, I push anyone to watch that movie. Watch Whiplash. If you want to learn how to just grind, and is there some super toxic bad ways of grinding? Yeah, and that's within that movie, and you see that. But there's
Mhm.
also there's a nugget there that's unbelievably beautiful, which is like you can always work harder. And that's like the whole Goggins thing. You can always work harder. When you feel like you're capped out, you're at 40%. Like you can always push harder. And I love that theme of it's you always have more.
And if we go back to what we talked about originally, just with training partners or business partners, that's what they're for. Like
Mm,
you gauge your expectations based on the level of output of that person. Like I see you just crank through abs, and I'm like, oh, dude, I'm so weak compared to you, right? Like I know I have more, you know?
yeah.
And again, that's why having a partner or someone to push against is so key because it's really easy to fall into that. Nah, it's good enough.
Mm,
It's good enough. I'm fine.
yeah.
What's good enough? What's good enough? And that's the question you have to answer. It Are you okay at the end of the day with saying, yeah, I tried,
Yeah.
or like us for the next year. I want to look back in August or June, whenever my diving career ends, and say I gave 100%. There's nothing I can look back on and say, I could have tried harder, because that will be the biggest regret ever, because I can't change it. Even if I don't hit my goals, I want to sit there and be like, okay, I tried, I did everything in my power, and it just didn't work out. I got to
Yeah.
live with that.
Yeah.
But living with the, I could have done this a little different, or I could have done that. Oh, that'll be killer.
The
So avoid that.
fears.
That's what I want to avoid. Yeah.
Yeah. And it does play into that like the corny saying, but like a birds of a feather flock together. It's like if your surrounding environment doesn't really care, if your surrounding environment, let's just lean into diving, all they do is party every weekend, like you're not going to recover and you're going to struggle. And I'm assuming that's the same way in all business. It's like, yeah, there's probably a give there, but like realistically, like you are going to be similar to the 5 to 10 people that you surround yourself with, and it's going to be like this never-ending struggle, like trying to like crawl out of this hole that they produce, unless it's like the group that you're around is a bunch of psychopaths in a good way that love to just grind all the time. And I feel like that's where you and I just love that push. Let it come to diving, abs, mindset, or even the business side. It's like you don't need five. You don't need two. You just need one good person to just run house with. But finding that one person's hard. It's super hard. But I feel like with social media now that you can kind of connect yourself with people that are actually pretty inspiring, that they might not be there with you, but you can feel that. But again, it's the only way to find those people in person is to get away from those people that are kind of sinking the ship, so to speak.
Yeah. I read a stat this morning actually, and it was like there was a study done on high performers in the workplace versus underperformers in the workplace. And if you were just like a regular employee and you got paired with a super achiever at that company, your level of output was over the time span increased by 15%.
Hmm.
If you were paired with a low performer, your level of output decreased 35%. So it just goes to show like human nature is be protected, be whatever, be cool. But again, if you're with the five people around you suck, you're gonna suck. It's just no matter, it's just how it is. And so again, yeah, like make sure, and it's clear with social media, or it's clear like in person when you're around someone who's high performing, you get this feel. You're like, oh shit, I didn't know like it was like that. You know, when I
Yeah.
first got to Purdue and I saw Steele or Dave training, you'd be like, oh, okay, like I get why they are who they are,
Yeah.
you know? And it's just because, again, you can re-gauge those expectations in your brain about, oh shit, maybe I got more in the tank, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, just to run into this because I've been wanting to talk about this, taking away from the diving side. A big piece that I feel like a lot of people are not inadequate, but it's not something they usually run into or do all the time, but it is useful long term, is the financial side of building wealth. And I've seen this a lot within, you know, the colleges that we're at. We connect with all these people. Even funny enough, it's in my mind, it's worse once you get out of college and just the lack of information that people have, which is kind of sad on our school system, but the lack of knowledge that people have with just investing their money. What are kind of your basic tips for someone to just start? Like how can I just make this easy for someone, just a palatable few tips to get into it?
Yeah, I would say one, you're right. Everything I've learned and how to build wealth long term is was not and is not talked about in school enough or at all. It's heartbreaking to be honest, but
Yeah.
the most actionable pieces I would say to anyone, and I've had a couple people ask me like, "What? How do I build well? How do I whatever?" One, there's so many resources online, like Dave Ramsey, for example. If you just go and watch his stuff, you will completely change your mindset on finance, on wealth creation over time, and just money in general. Like there are so many amazing resources online, and I would say Dave Ramsey is an incredible place to start because again, it just comes down to one, you have to increase your earning power. Two, you have to save the money that you make. And three, obviously, you want to build it passively, and that would be the investing piece. And just to go down the investing piece a little bit more, I would say look into what an IRA is, not a retirement account if you don't have one. I have a Roth IRA. You can take, contribute a certain amount per year, invest it in a simple index fund, S&P 500. And over 60 years, if you contribute, or 50 years, if you contribute, you'll be quite wealthy at the end. And I think that's the easiest thing to do. And there's so many resources to learn how to do that. Like, there's not even worth my time trying to explain it here. Go look it up. It's so easy. Open a IRA or retirement account, Fidelity, anywhere, and put money in it, save your money, and you'll build wealth. It's just inevitable.
It was kind of surprising to me to see this because once I started looking into it, it kind of baffled me because you get these, I mean, it's with everything, of course, but you have the two different sides, like the logical, let's just like ease our way into this. This is a slow drip of getting to this mass amount of money. And like that's kind of how wealth is created is in time. And yeah, you can speed it up, so to speak, with, hammering out a good business and sure, but like wealth doesn't just hit you in the face because you made one good investment. And that's, I think, the scary part when we saw these apps kind of pop up and start to gamify investing. And I feel like that happened more so during, the lockdowns and stuff like that, where people were just making absurd, uh, like options trading and losing everything or being millions of dollars in debt. So you see those two different like worlds of like, let's take our time. The Dave Ramsey, like, why don't you pay off your house? You know, wouldn't that be nuts that you wouldn't have to think about that? And then you have the other guys who are like, invest in X, Y, or Z, and it's going to blow up, sell. And it's just not as likely. What's like, how do you differentiate between the two? Because one of them seems a lot more appealing.
Yeah, well, it goes back to personal preference. Like some people will have a bigger risk appetite than others. Like some people will be more willing to work for a startup than to go get a regular 9 to 5. Obviously, working with a startup, your hours may be, 12 a.m. to whatever, right? And you're working significantly longer, making less money, but the long-term upside may be way higher than getting a, traditional corporate job. So I'd say risk appetite is key. Also, you have to know like you can balance long-term wealth creation with short-term wealth creation, right? Like I can invest in myself and build, let's say my earning potential is like 60K per year. I can invest short-term in skills that will take that to 120K per year or 250K per year, while also still doing the traditional boring, just invest, blah, 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 like in a low risk index fund and go from there. So I would say, yeah, again, you just have to know who you are. You have to also understand that very few times does success happen overnight, right? Diving, business, it always takes a long time, especially for anything good that will be kept long term. Like you mentioned with Robinhood, one of the gamified trading apps, and like GameStop or AMC, yeah, like people were overnight making millions
Mm.
and then turning around a week later and they have nothing, right? Or same with crypto trading. Like, again, if there's something in life that's super easy and you're making a ton of money, I would be very careful. Because even in my experience trading, like when I first started trading in 2020, I made a ton of money. And then since then, it's just been like stagnant, right? I actually learned like, oh, it's not this easy, right? I have to again go through that ignorance debt and actually learn what reality is. And again, that's what I would hone in on. You have to know who you are. You have to know what your risk appetite is, and then you obviously there's a balance that you have to strike.
Yeah. And so for the people that didn't have parents, let's say like ours that are like have been financially savvy that hey, like let's start investing. This is a good idea, right? They brought it up to our attention. Hey, we suggest you do this because if you want to be, in a safe spot with this money um that you can have, you should probably start investing now. When would you suggest people to start investing? I know it's like, say you're in high school, it's not like you're really going to have any money to invest, but maybe that's not a bad time if you have a part-time gig, or how would you do that? How would you suggest that someone can start and when?
Yeah, I mean, I started just getting interested in it, I think when I was like 21, and I'm 24 now, so it's maybe I was 20, so it's been 4 years, I think. But if I could go back and start it all over, I would start like at 12.
Yeah.
The second I even understood what building wealth is long term, I would start investing. I would start looking at the stock market, at least kind of understanding the factors at play. You don't have to go super in depth, but at least understand like, oh, well, people buy because they're greedy and they want price to go up, or people sell because they're fearful of losing what they have. That dynamic between supply and demand or fear and greed is like the first thing you should try to understand. And we see it every day with the choices people make, right? Like, okay, I know I could get in the car without my seatbelt, but obviously, like, if I get in a crash, maybe I'm screwed, right? So that even that decision making comes into the market. But yeah, I would say, if you're 15 or whatever, just start looking at the market, start trying to understand the forces at play, study the best. So like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, I mean, those are the two like traditional finance names. And then in my realm, there's William O'Neill, Mark Minervini. Those are more of the, momentum investing type deals. But yeah, I would say just start figuring it out. At least open up your horizons to what goes on in the stock market for sure.
Yeah, I think it's actually kind of interesting for me too when I think about not myself, but maybe lightly teaching someone else. Some of the advice that I gave that I don't necessarily remember where I heard it, but it made sense to me was if you find a company that you trust that you like, do you think it's going to last? Then put some money in there and
Exactly.
let's see if that holds off. And imagine you do that for your kid at as they're born. You go, even if it's a few dollars, like you don't have to be rich to become wealthy. Like if you just start putting in money now, hey, I do really trust Amazon, and I have a feeling that they're going to continue to grow because historically they have. Okay, put in $5 a month, $5 a week for your kid, and see what happens over their lifetime or until they're 18. And you want to go, hey, the rest is up to you, but like you have this nest now to where you can decide what you want to do. Do you think you'll kind of do something similar with your kid, or what's that look like for you? How are you gonna kind of educate and build?
Yeah, so I mean, just to go back to the previous question too, like, okay, if you're 15, what do? Well, you download Robinhood, you connect to your bank account, whatever you have in it,
Hmm.
and you decide how much you want to risk. Like, if I have $100 and I know if my life doesn't change if I lose $100, okay, I'll use that 100. I'll put it into something like Tesla or Apple or something that I know overnight isn't going to go away, and you just slowly put money like that into companies like you just said that you trust. A quick anecdote is I know someone whose grandpa started investing in like UPS in the 70s or something and hasn't touched it for 40 years or 50 years now, and it's worth just an absurd amount of money, right? And that idea stayed the same. They knew the Postal Service was where they wanted to go. They put money in it, didn't look at it, and then they realized 50 years later, like, oh, this is legit. So yeah, I would say easiest way to get into the market, download Robinhood, connect your bank account, decide an amount of money that you'd be willing to lose if it all blew up overnight, and buy the company you know, 100%. I think that's the best, most actual advice you can give.
Yeah, because I think one thing for me hearing, because of course there's so many different opinions, especially now that there's the internet. It's everyone hears everything from every opinion and spot in the world. And so, I always thought like, oh, it has to be balanced. I have to invest in all of these things when that's not necessarily true. Like the UPS, like you can just pick one. Like, yeah, there's the chance that if that doesn't work, everything's gone. Yeah, that is a
Yep.
reality to it. But also it's like it's everything is a risk. So you just have to pick that risk and go with that. Does it make sense to kind of spread out? I'm assuming yes, because this isn't my field of expertise, but it's not a necessity. And if you don't feel like you have the money or the capital to do that, then don't do that. Like don't let that be the deciding factor of, oh, I'm not going to invest or I will invest. Like that's not really that within itself isn't smart.
Yeah, it's actually funny because Warren Buffett, who's one of the richest people ever, has a very concentrated position in Apple. He's got like 40% of his net worth in Apple. That in dollar terms, I think, is like $5 billion or $7 billion in
Yeah.
Apple. And this dude has a fortune. And again, like to what you just said, diversification and spreading out your money is actually one of the easiest ways to never make any money.
Hmm.
Because if one idea hits, let's say you put $10 of your $100 in Tesla and it doubles, okay, well now you have $20. It's not great. If you put all of that 100 in Tesla and it doubles, now you have $200, right? And so, again, the risk appetite is important. So, where are you in your life? Like, if I was Warren Buffett, I definitely would not have 4 billion, $7 billion in Apple, but that's him, right? Like, he's already built his wealth. He's good. So, yeah, back to what you just said. The risk appetite is key, but you don't want to spread yourself too thin because you'll never make anything if you are.
Yeah. And then the other piece there is, well, do I go out of my way and just find a professional? Or maybe is it smart for me at the beginning to kind of understand, what this space looks like? Because you can pay for, I'm just going to go quote unquote professional, but there's also a lot of really bad professionals out there. And so if you don't
Oh, yeah.
necessarily know what you're doing, then that again, quote unquote professional might be horrible. and you actually might lose that money. And so does that make more sense in your mind that, hey, like you should at least spend, a few months or at least some form of time to understand the space before you even get into it to see, hey, is this professional full of fluff?
Yeah, 100%. Because think like, okay, if I put an hour every weekend for the next 2 years into learning how to invest or at least understand the markets, you'll be able to spot fluff or BS very quickly when you go and talk to these financial advisors who say, "Yeah, give me your money. I'll take a small fee, and then maybe you'll beat the S&P's return." Where again, if you're paying a percentage to them, they underperform, you're double losing money. Whereas if you just spent a little bit of time, obviously it's a profession in itself. If you want to actually trade and do it right, yeah, okay, it's going to take time. But if you want to passively build wealth, like, yeah, spend a little bit of time, understand what's good and what's bad, and then you'll be able to really realize like if someone's full of it or not when they say, give me your money."
Yeah, that's something I've kind of we see it everywhere now, especially now that you can recognize it in all of these different fields. Let it be diving, and you meet a coach that's a quote unquote professional, and then you just recognize it's more so the talent they might have been able to just acquire versus the actual
Oh yeah.
knowledge. And they're just fluffing or they're just good at schmoozing people. And you're like, well, okay. And then you see that in now that I'm in the field of strength and conditioning and how it gets very convoluted, muddy, and you just don't know, well, what is right? Full range of motion or partial or stopping at 90 is it just runs into so many different ways. And yeah, there's a million different ways to skin a cat. But like you can also kill the cat. You can kill the cat
Exactly.
or
Nice.
you can lose all your
Nice. I
money.
like that. I like that.
so
Nice.
so it's just kind of interesting to see all these pieces, and I guess it does walk me back into that line of thinking of like, hey, it's important to know a range of different things. Let that be investing, let that, even if you're an athlete, like it might be helpful to understand the reasons why you're doing some of these strength and conditioning moves. Why, how do we cycle through volume and intensity? It might just help you because, you could, metaphorically kill the cat. You could blow out your knee, you could
Oh
blow up
yeah.
your back because your strength coach is a lunatic, or you could lose all your money because your investor's a lunatic. And so usually kind of waltzing your way into the knowledge, even if it's partial knowledge, just light amounts of knowledge and just a soft understanding is so important to so many things. And I said it the last podcast, I'm going to say it again. I think I got this from Naval, but it's like specializations for insects. Like just, you don't have to know 100% of one thing. Just start to taste a lot of things so you can make sure you're not running into brick walls and, slowing yourself down.
Yeah, and once you've tasted enough things, you can decide where you should specify, right? Like I could decide or could have decided to specialize in, I don't know, being a mechanic or something, right? I probably wouldn't have found it super fun long term, but I've been around cars. I've also been around the market, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I like the market a lot more. Let me go down that route, you know?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Just getting a baseline understanding of the important things in any profession, like a baseline understanding of sleep and diving, a baseline understanding of recovery, of eating, of stretching, those things will never hurt you. And if you want to be really great, it's definitely better to know than to not know.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you fall into that, well, like obsession's gonna, beat talent over time, which I agree, but also just being logically thinking about the many things that surround what you're doing. Because again, it's like I could be 100% in diving, but just like you said, if I don't know how to recover, if I don't understand the importance of sleep, if I don't understand the importance of nutrition, uh, it, that could be a problem because then that's gonna seep into your diving. So if you're it's the whole 72-hour rule that Adam shares. It's like if you drink Saturday, Monday still might suck and you might feel okay, but there are studies showing that like you still have those remnants. Like there's still an effect on what you're doing. let that be like force output or just like cognitive, ability
Functioning,
to
yeah.
do something. Yeah.
Yep.
And so it's very important to understand not everything, but lightly understand a good amount of things so you can be as proficient at what you're doing as possible.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just getting a baseline of the inputs that actually affect your reality is the most important, right? Because there could be 80% of things. I mean, this is the Pareto principle, right? Like 20% of the inputs goes to 80% of the outputs. But you just have to, what are those 20% of the inputs? And the only way you'll know is if you kind of taste a little bit of everything and realize, like, okay, this actually has an effect on my business's bottom line, my diving performance's bottom line, whatever the case may be. But
Mm,
yeah, you got to know what those 20% is.
yeah. Well, I hope that people got a good amount of base knowledge from this, from investing to athletics. I know I'm gonna drag you back onto this podcast at some point again, but where can people find you and start to taste upon your fantastic knowledge?
Everything I post stock wise is on Twitter at Greg Duncan _. I have a website, upsideunlimited.com. If you want to join my email newsletter just to kind of get a baseline information, baseline knowledge on stocks itself, it is upsideunlimitednewsletter.com. And those are the three. I mean, that's pretty much where I'm situated.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for your time. I'm assuming you're gonna go back to grinding and all
Cheers.
things, but
Yes.
yeah, thank you for your time, and we'll have to catch you around and get you back on this podcast soon. So, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, dude. Appreciate you. We got a ton more to talk about,
Oh yeah.
diving wise, all that. So we
Oh,
got it
just
all.
scratching the surface.
Just scratching the surface.
All right, brother. Well,
Love it.
take care, and we'll be chatting soon.
Cheers. Back
All
at
right,
you.
peace.